If you don't know me, hello, I'm Jallomoth, the world's biggest Choso fan. And if you do know me, then you knew this was coming. I was originally going to wait until Choso kicked the bucket like every other JJK character to discuss the breadth of who he was, but dude refuses to die, and after a week of my jaw being firmly on the floor from this 22 minutes of animation, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. This is my analysis of Red Scale, the 37th and best episode of Jujutsu Kaisen. So far. Red Scale opens with a seemingly innocuous but deeply foreboding sign, a literal sign and not a welcoming one. Turn around, stop, no crossing. This is all really good advice for anyone without a death wish in Shibuya City 2018. Between a horde of transfigured monsters, various curse users, the disaster curses, Kenjaku, Toji, and even Sukuna and Maharaga, the feeling to turn back around and maybe skip this arc would become too much to bear for any normal person. But as the lights flicker, the sign denoting no crossing fades directly into Yuji, doing just that. Coming upon quite the important crossing himself. Back in episode 22 of Jujutsu Kaisen, The Origin of Blind Obedience Part 1, we hear this exact quote from Nita. Crossing a river or other border, acts that symbolize crossing over to the afterlife, these carry important meanings in sorcery. These intangible borders are a really interesting concept when talking about the mythos of Jujutsu Kaisen's world. And a friend of mine, the Kogane, has a really wonderful analysis of this called Great Theory, which you can find in the JJK Iceberg Volume 2 right on this channel. One of the many reasons the Shibuya incident ended up so phenomenally manic could be because of the countless underground rivers, grates, and overall crossings that everyone teeters on in the underground systems of Japan. Many important moments are conveniently right on top of these crossings, and they're sometimes the only thing in the panel except the characters. This is really intriguing. The only thing you losers could focus on in the comments, though, is how, actually, those aren't great, you idiot. They're haptic tactile paving for blind people. Literally hundreds of people commented this, at least a few every week without fail. Are you guys really that dense, though? Do you not listen? Sorry Kogane didn't want to name it haptic tile paving theory. Do you guys not realize that you're arguing directly in her theory's favor? These are literal markings of a crossing, even more so than a grate is, like, by far. If you thought about it for any longer than 4 seconds, I wouldn't have to complain about this. But speaking of 4 seconds, that's how far we are into the episode we're supposed to be analyzing, so let's pick up the pace here. I watched Red Scale at 0.25 speed, and here's what I noticed. This episode is hell. And no, I don't just mean because of the animators who are currently in hell inside Mappa Studios, but Red Scale, by nature, is the story of a man's descent into hell. Yuji Itadori, our main character, finds himself at a crossroads with a terrifying decision to make. He's sprinting through Shibuya, descending deeper and farther into the city's heart, trying desperately to find where Gojo's been sealed, on a mission to free his teacher. If Gojo remains sealed, there's a good chance that there will be no hope left for the world. But on this worldly important mission, he comes across a crowd of thousands screaming for help against the horde of Mahito's transfigured human monstrosities. We see another sign, this time pointing in 2 different directions, a marking to indicate this literal crossroads. Yuji has been here, at the cusp of fate with a choice to make many times before. Luckily, this time, fate was on his side, and the perfect friend was there to save the day, with Inumaki. Toge is thankfully the perfect counter for this horde, and once again, trusting within his comrades has made this decision, which was just mere seconds ago an impossible one to grapple with, far, far easier. But this is all just dark foreshadowing, and it's begging us to think, what's gonna happen when there are no allies left to bail Yuji out? Not that Yuji is totally reliant on those around him, time and time again he holds his own, incredibly bravely and impressively might I add. But to say Yuji would be nowhere without his friends around him is an understatement, and this episode is the logical conclusion to that. What does Yuji do when there's no one there for him?
でも周りに味方が何人いようと死ぬ時は一人だよ.
Even with literal signs everywhere telling him to run, he doesn't back down. I mean, it's not like Yuji doesn't know the importance of crossing borders, he's seen my iceberg videos, yet despite this, he bounds over a locked gate, charging forward, willingly throwing himself into the mouth of the wolf. Do you know what Yuji versus Choso feels like? A boss fight. The second the two enter each other's field of view, a clock is heard ticking in the background. Choso has an overwhelmingly powerful aura, and confined in such a tight space, this really becomes more of a dark game of cat and mouse than a fight. These two know very little about each other at the time of their confrontation. Yuji has never even met Choso, but undoubtedly knows his blood all too well. And then there's Choso. Choso's life began with death. He was a stillborn, aborted from a cursed woman 150 years ago in the Meiji era. This woman's unique biology made her a target for the evil scientist Kenjaku, and he forced her to have his cursed child over and over and over again. This process never worked, and left the world with 9 half-human, half-cursed spirit fetuses, which sat in jars that the sorcerers somehow got their hands on in that time. Choso and his brothers were imprisoned in a warehouse under Jujutsu Tech for a century, stuck in limbo somewhere amid the mess of Tengen's barriers. The brothers, Naranso, Shōoso, Tanso, Sanso, Kotsuso, and Shoso all still remain trapped in this wretched form. Choso and his 2 eldest brothers, Kechizu and Eso, were given human vessels by their father Kenjaku, and Mahito too, who's kinda like their bitchy stepmom, I guess. Choso is full of hatred that he doesn't know what to do with. Despite being 150 years old, he was basically just born. All he knows is the blood pumping through him, the same blood surging through his brothers, the only people he has other than a loveless and deranged father who he absolutely loathes. "It's daddy killing time" is probably the greatest line in shonen history. Choso only knows Kenjaku as Noritoshi Kamo, similar to how modern people mistake him for Subaru Gatos. Kamo is genetically Choso's father, but was just the vessel for the evil brain inside that body. This is the reason that Choso has the Kamo family's blood manipulation technique to begin with, and why Choso strangely has 3 parents, in a way. But let's face it, Kenjaku is his father. He willed him into existence, taking both a man and woman hostage to create him entirely of his own deliberate scheme to create the perfect killing machine, one to rise above all life and dominate the earth as his underling. But all Choso wanted was his 2 brothers Eso and Kechizu's safety and happiness. That's the only reason he stuck with Kenjaku in the first place, so his brothers would live a better life. He was a ruthless killer of hundreds of innocent people in his fight against Gojo, feeling nothing at the time. But after the fact, this eats him from the inside out, and he wishes he would have defected from Kenjaku immediately. Maybe then, his 2 brothers wouldn't have been slain by Yuji Itadori. Because Choso has no outlet for his built-up rage, he is ruthless, especially so with the man who ripped his brothers from him. This is shown when, before Yuji's feet even hit the floor, Choso is firing a piercing stream of highly pressurized blood far faster than the speed of sound directly at his heart. Choso is merciless and quite evil himself, despite what Twitter fan art wants you to believe. Seriously, don't forget, just 2 episodes, he cut like 100 dudes in half just to slightly piss Gojo off because, I don't know, his dad, mom, and her twink side piece asked him to? And he was just like, oh, whatever, fine. Basically just treated it like doing some chores. The supersonic insta-kill attack he opens with on Yuji literally slices the sign from the beginning in half. He is now at the point of no return. Yuji has entered hell, and there's no turning back. Okay, just to blue ball you guys even more from me actually talking about the episode, let's psychoanalyze Yuji and his side of this for a quick second. Itadori is the personification of resistance and perseverance. He let Mahito repeatedly lacerate and puncture his body just to get within distance of the fucker. He walked straight into like 7 completely unguarded haymakers from Hikari. He took responsibility for Sukuna's mass murder in his trial against Higuruma, not even knowing or caring how drastic the consequences were. He marches forward to strike a blow on Sukuna's shit-eating grin, letting his entire body get cleaved and sliced into pieces. And he bounds over the gates of hell, determined as ever, striding headstrong into death itself. Yuji is a cog, constantly aware of his role in the bigger machine. Later, when Yuji takes the blame and pleads guilty for the 2,000 plus deaths Sukuna and Sukuna alone caused while on trial in Higuruma's domain, he doesn't try to shift responsibility at all. No defense of himself, yet still standing. He lets his resolve speak for itself, because the truth is, Yuji feels completely responsible. He carries a heavy burden and feels truly guilty. And in the case of the municipal court of Shibuya versus Yuji Itadori on 2 counts of murder, he is guilty. Yuji murdered Eso and Kechizu. Yes, in self-defense, but as Yuji would say, the fact remains, tears were shed over the lives I ended tonight. That's all. Yuji will never in his life forget how hard it was to rip these brothers apart and send them to hell. In hell! The only moment of rest Choso gives Yuji is when he asks him if his brothers had any last words. Yuji is a man brimming with guilt. It's the reason he could so brazenly run into any situation with no fear. He answers honestly, no, they didn't have any last words, but they did cry. This admission burns a flame under Choso hot enough to boil his blood, making him even more ruthlessly brutal than he was already planning to be, and marking the beginning of a messy scrap between two predators for survival. An episode like this is something I'd bring up to defend the opinion that Jujutsu Kaisen has one of the most phenomenal adaptations of all time, which I do agree with. It's up there with Mob Psycho. But the things that were important in the manga get knocked out of the park in the anime. In the manga, it's like, yeah man, I get it, Choso's good at any range. But in the anime, it's like, oh my god, run, he's unkillable, he's inescapable! This is when it clicked for me. This fight is the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Yuji will never back down and never die, and Choso is an ever-present menace to whomever his sights are on. Each one of Choso's attacks have a 50-50 chance of killing Yuji outright. This is a 4-dimensional crossroads. Yuji constantly has to make the right decisions every single time one must be made, all within a split second, or it's his life. But if Black Flash, Divergent Fist, and this moment have taught us anything, it's that Yuji Itadori has an incredible sense of timing. And he knows it, which is why he creates this giant opening for himself for Choso to fire, to at least take the control over the pace of the fight. This is ingenious, and this fraction of a second choice saves his life, getting him once again into the much more effective zone, close range. When Yuji gets into close range, he is a demon god, as Choso himself will one day say. Sidebar, I honestly would adore if Yuji's future domain expansion was a simple rope connecting him and his target, locking them into his effective range. I know plenty of people think it could be a boxing ring, but I'd much prefer this older, more primal type of restriction. It would fit him incredibly well. But what doesn't fit him incredibly well is a fight with Choso in any spatial capacity. Choso can fire blood-splattered buckshot up close in an incredibly brutal burst, which we'll see later in one of the most satisfying attacks in the entire series. What makes Choso so incredibly special is that just like Yuji, he's very adaptable, but even more so. Adaptability is something you could point out in nearly every panel Choso is in. Adapting to a new era, a new family, and every single attack you could throw at him. Blood is incredibly versatile, and with his quick thinking and instinctual jujutsu power, he dominates Itadori and turns him into a quivering underdog. He wields an ocean of poison blood, slicing exorcism, convergence, piercing blood, supernova, blood edge, flowing red scale, stack, blood meteorite, wing king. Choso has Wolverine claws and can go into Gum Gum gear too. This episode masterfully shows how terrifying Choso is just by nature. Because of being half curse and all, he can turn cursed energy directly into blood. He's a manipulator of blood with an infinite supply of it at his disposal. But despite this, Yuji never runs. But why do I keep calling this subway station hell? Does this mean anything? What's the bigger picture here? Well, if you're looking for a sign, they punctuate every scene in this episode, as we've already gone over. One flies right in front of Choso, basically deciding for him to run towards Yuji. This is all to really convey how fated these two were to meet. We know fate is real in JJK, as Toji was said to shatter it previously. These two's blood drives them ever closer until this dark confrontation. This episode's themes of hell are everywhere in my opinion, like the bath of red light that the scenes are soaked in, or the fact that this is all happening underground. But more specifically, this fight evokes Dante's Inferno to me. For those uninitiated, Dante's Inferno is a segment of the Divine Comedy, an Italian narrative poem by Dante Alighieri that took the man decades to write. It follows Dante himself trekking through the 9 layers of hell in search of an escape, being guided by a poet named Virgil along the way. I think Red Scale is Gege's brief retelling of Inferno, all encapsulated in the meeting of two men. Yuji is Dante, a man seeking liberation from the hell he finds himself in, and just like how Dante has Virgil, Yuji has a guide too with that of Mechamaru. Mechamaru gives him a neat video game hint to beat the boss fight, kind of destroying what I said earlier about Yuji being left to his own devices for once, but don't worry, Yuji will be alone soon. Very, very alone, like last man on earth type shit. But if Yuji is Dante, then who is Choso? Well, it's simple. Choso is hell, all 9 layers of it. He represents and carries the weight in his soul of all 9 of his brothers and their bloodline. It goes without saying Gege really likes to reference Buddhism generally in his work, but he isn't afraid of touching on other religions such as Hinduism or even Christianity, so I don't think the Catholic Inferno story is off limits by any means. But the thing that really builds this theory's strength in my mind is actually a Buddhist belief. The 9 stages of decay. Known also as the 9-phase diagram, this is a Buddhist set of paintings that depict the stages of death and decomposition upon the human body. This is obviously where Gege took Choso's inspiration from, not only because his brothers have poison blood, not only because Kechizu is clearly a bloated and discolored corpse, not only because Esso's body emits a foul, rotting stench and he has rot technique, but because they are literally called the Death Womb Paintings. Choso and his brothers are the 9 personified stages of death, with him being the exudation of blood if I had to guess, even though that wouldn't make him the first painting, so I'm not quite sure why he's the oldest. See, Gege borrows inspiration from these ideas, but in no way strictly adheres to them. I think he and the 2 directors of this episode really married the 2 ideas together to make this episode have the hellish dread of looming death that it has. And if the Dante's Inferno inspiration is entirely false, I don't find it wrong to make a connection between the 2, whether it was purposeful or not. I find it meaningful enough that they struck the same chord in me. Like, this episode was so moving and well-directed that it made me instinctively conjure a visage of hell in my mind. Back to the episode, Yuji finds himself at yet another crossroads as he's deciding whether or not to run into this bathroom, with a 1 in 10 chance he'll ever get to walk out again, at best. Yuji is so hot-headed and headstrong that he goes for it. He's already trapped in a barrier, but still decides to run down into the city, deep into the station, cornering himself literally in a bathroom, basically the boiler room of hell. But this is a ploy, so why does Choso keep playing along with this? Is he stupid? He knew Yuji was baiting him earlier. He knows he's smart and this is obviously a trap, but just like Yuji, he keeps moving forward. For Choso, it's his brothers pushing him, making him never even dream of looking back or turning away. He is just on sight. This is both of their crossroads, the point of no return, this bathroom. Yuji and Mekamaru's plan worked like a charm, and running into this cramped space and triggering the sprinklers did 2 things. Made Choso's blood completely unusable outside his body as it dilutes in the water, and trapping him within Yuji's range. But come on, you should already know he's the most vigilant and adaptable being to ever walk this earth. The narrator flat out says. Choso lacked combat experience, so he couldn't comprehend what was happening to him. He just coldly accepted the new reality, and conducted his blood manipulation within his body. Yes, Yuji is the underdog. He hides out and jumps at him, bites at his hand whenever he's close, headbutts him. Yuji is a scrapper. But he begins to feel too confident as the 2 are now on equal footing, and this leads to his ultimate downfall, and his liver being pierced. Reinforcing his ideology, Itadori refuses to die. He just changes his goals and now refuses to let Choso leave alive. Yuji's attacks, when they finally do land, have a profound impact on Choso. Just 3 hits and Choso is spitting up teeth and begging for an opening. This badass back and forth was largely inspired by the film The Raid 2, which has a plot told through the clashing of fists. Many people within the JJK community know this fact, but something you may not be aware of is that the character representing Yuji in that scene is actually the villain of the movie, which is sort of interesting and impactful when looking at all the viewpoints here. Like we said previously, Yuji is the aggressor here. He is the guilty. And just as Yuji is risking everything for this, Choso is right there on the precipice with him, using very risky techniques that could kill him in the process. It's beyond intense, and this tale, much like Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, is a battle of wills, a battle of ideals. Episode 37, Red Scale, has in my opinion some of the most fluid animation that I've ever seen, which is fitting considering the whole theme of, blood. The rendering is so incredibly enthralling and engaging that my eyes were glued to the screen the entire time the episode was on. Another thing that binds this experience into one that I'll never forget is that the music for this entire episode kicks ass. Before this episode aired, if you asked me which my favorite was, I'd say episode 24, Accomplices. Is it because it's Choso's first appearance? Believe it or not, no, because for some reason they made him incredibly ugly at first. But it's because of the weight of Choso's brothers' deaths. Everything comes together to make this the most heavy-feeling episode of the entire first season. The presentation, the music, especially the song Remember by Cold Rain, which plays when Yuji and Nobara truly become accomplices. This song alone turns this episode into an unmistakably flawless finale to the season to me, and Red Scale is everything Accomplices was, but enhanced. I didn't just bring up Remember because of how good of a song it is. In Red Scale, the height of Choso and Yuji's bout is undercut with the song... I actually can't tell you because they haven't released the soundtrack for JJK Season 2 yet, but you can find a cover of it here on YouTube called Remember These Hands by James Liam Figueroa, which, I'm going to be honest, should be the official title. This new imagining of Remember is touching and yet simultaneously badass. Its inclusion evokes their brotherly bond and makes you actually experience their relation in a very real way. This fight is stunning, captivating, fast-paced, imaginative, creative, awe-inspiring, and not one moment was this episode's foot off the gas. When Yuji is stunned by bolts of blood slashing him open, the music becomes muted and distant before triumphantly reminding us that Choso is the dark hero here, taking back what his brothers were stripped of. As they trade blows, the song builds higher and higher until the climax. Yuji's tricks have saved him a dozen times by now. He hasn't used his left hand since the beginning of the fight, all in a ploy to surprise attack Choso. The song echoes the moment he killed both his kin as Yuji delivers the finishing blow. But then... Yuji lay there, defeated, a slash of light on his chest. A symbol Sukuna has taught us to mean death. Choso, a walking emissary for death itself, raises his hand to throw the killing strike, when that same mark of death shines upon him. Choso is paralyzed, frozen by nostalgia, paranoia, fear, confusion. He becomes plagued with thoughts of the truth, told through a false lens, masked behind a romanticized and vintage view of the past that never happened. The siblings all sharing a meal with Yuji, sitting amongst them. One of them, he swirls their blood together to see if they have a connection, and becomes sick to his stomach. Through the clash of blood, at the threshold, the ultimate crossroad, death itself, Choso, recognizes his blood in Yuji's. He doesn't know how, but the two are related. Brothers. He couldn't comprehend what was happening to him. He just coldly accepted the new reality. And this is why Red Scale is such a tragedy. Yuji is fighting for the family he's found at Jujutsu Tech, and Choso is fighting for the family he's been denied of his whole life. He was going to kill Yuji, but with no father left, a mother he never met, and 9 brothers, all far and away, gone. Like a lesson, a test, Choso's victim ended up being his last real family. Luckily, Choso has a heart and changed his mind. And as strange as it may be, the two do connect again as brothers. Yuji doesn't know that they're brothers yet because I told him to skip the part of my iceberg video where I reveal who his mommy is. But to be honest, even without being related, this fight would have made them brothers anyways. I don't have a brother, but I think it's like 95% fighting and 5% bonding, but like during the fighting. And that beautiful dance of blows is what brings bros together. We saw it with Todo, and now we see it in Choso. Sidebar again, but how the hell are we gonna let Gege not allow Todo and Choso to meet? These are two characters manically convinced that the MC is their brother, and we're really not gonna let them clash? JJK's pacing can be wishy-washy at best, and as much as JJK isn't a slice of life, I'm sure we'd all appreciate getting to see more character interaction within this series. We never once got Yuki interacting with anyone, really, other than her boyfriend. But none of her talking to Gojo or Yuta, 2 other special grades. We've gotten hardly any of Maki and Yuta, despite their closeness in JJK 0. I could go on and on and on. But the one that hurts more than any is that Yuji's biological brother and his adopted brother haven't met. They'd either become best friends or worst enemies, and not knowing where they stand is destroying me more than it probably should. At the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, and after the conclusion of Choso's story, I'll probably come back and refine my thoughts and make a full analysis of his entire life as we know it. Until then, if you want more Choso in your life, you could join my Discord server, which isn't JJK themed, but we have a thread in the JJK channel called Choso's Temple, and I'm not going to tell you what we do in there. Down there with the Discord link in the description are my socials and my Patreon if you want to support me and get exclusive access to some of my content. But all I want to say is if you really like my iceberg videos and this, go watch some of my other stuff. I curate more than just thoughts on shonen. I talk about weird Japanese media, movies of all kinds, and a whole lot more. I've been your host, Jallomoth. Your homework is to admire Choso, not as much as Back Tonight, but more than Ryan Gosling. And of course, to stay curious. For instance, if you like Ghetto, you're a lesbian. If you like Toji, you love getting pegged.